Hello, my name is Alex Stoltz, and welcome to this special edition of Future of Film podcast presented in partnership with Garden Studios. Where do you stand on AI? Do you see it as a democratizing force in film, or more of a destructive one, as a creative empowerer, or more like an artistic death bot? Well, one thing for sure is that the technology is not going anywhere. In fact, it's rapidly accelerating and only going to become more influential in the filmmaking process. And if that sounds a bit like the start of a dystopian sci-fi movie, it's not meant to, but the question really becomes then how we direct it, how we shape it, how we apply it. And these were some of the questions that were certainly circulating recently when we met at AI Open Days, which was held at Garden Studios in London. Across 2 days of workshops, discussions, demonstrations, and even some filmmaking, executives and artists from across art and entertainment, from choreographers to VFX artists, from animators to actors and distributors and producers, discussed and shared on this topic. And we were lucky enough to have demonstrations of some of the very latest technology using AI, including Move, Charisma, Adapt, and Wonder Dynamics. So in this series of podcasts, I spoke to some of the people behind the tools we mentioned to understand how AI is being used, to understand their tools and how they see them fitting into the future of film. And well, I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you enjoy this special edition of the Future of Film podcast, presented in partnership with Garden Studios.
So my name's Niall Hendry. I am VP of Partnerships at Move.ai. What that means is that I look after a lot of our large-scale customers, integration partners, and very much the industry-facing arm of Move.ai. At Move, we do markerless motion capture, and by that we use video to create mocap data, using anything from production cameras all the way to devices in your pockets, such as iPhones.
Amazing. So markerless motion capture means that you don't need to wear a suit.
Exactly, yeah. So to give a potted history of mocap, motion capture in its different forms has been around really since the 30s, when people were doing frame matching in Hollywood, and then there was mechanical systems in the sort of 80s, and optical took off in the 90s, particularly, and initially in biomechanical use cases, right? So people looking at gait analysis and sports analysis and rehabilitation, and a lot of those technologies really had their, let's call it their Mandalorian moment with Lord of the Rings, where Andy Serkis playing Gollum really opened up what performance and motion capture is. And fundamentally, there's a couple of ways to do mocap, right? They've been around for a long time. So optical is one way. Optical very much uses, there are a number of companies out there that do that, uses either infrared or video to track active markers. And what they do is they look for markers on the body that are placed in strategic positions on the body. And then that data is extracted and streamed and then reconfigured and brought together to represent a human body. You've also got inertial systems that use a combination of magnetometers, gyroscopes, and that type of technology to be able to then place marker, signal receivers and senders at strategic points in the body and do a similar sort of thing. Whereas we use video, a combination of AI, to be able to do equivalent level data production, mocap data creation, but as I say, using only video.
Yeah. And that makes it a lot more accessible.
It does. The reason for which is, as I say, mocap's been around for a while, but it's quite constrained in a number of ways. You need a studio setup for certain motion capture types. Let's take optical, for instance. You need good light conditions. It's using infrared. using it at night, basically off the cards, because it's not tracking the humans, it's tracking the reflections of the markers. So using it at night doesn't really work. You are limited to volume size. That's really a cost thing as well. So like you can have a huge mocap set, but it costs you millions, if not up to tens of millions of dollars to be able to track it on a large area. And plus there's the suits, right? Scalability of suits doesn't really help. Each individual has to have a suit. Each suit takes 45 minutes to calibrate, and the 10 minutes to do a ROM. If a marker falls off, it's challenging. Inertial suits have similar sort of problems, but are also prone to things like drift. So the data can move from its origin point or where it should be, which means constant recalibration. Whereas using video allows you performers, firstly, to not be inhibited and to perform more naturally. But because we basically built the system sort of in conjunction with EA initially, who wanted to do a lot of their video game IP using the system for large volume stuff. So we were actually, side by side contrasted with the gold standard, which is Vicon, in terms of mocap. And we spent a long time working with them, the animation team at EA, to understand what level of quality we need to get at. But what we also realized is when we were doing that and building it out is that our pipeline in terms of the processing backend, which I'll get into in a little bit, is that it became more robust. So we wanted to be able to scale beyond just the high end into anyone who wants to create mocap world. And we were going through a process of moving from a GoPro based workflow, which is great, not that expensive, but also workflow wise not brilliant. Like offloading video from GoPros is not great. And we had this sort of fork in the road moment that was, do we go and buy a bunch of cheap cameras from China and sell them as a bundled Move package? And we were looking into this and we're like, do we put it in package it up in a little pelly case, little welcome pack, all that stuff. And we were sat in the office having a cup of tea. Or we might have been in the pub, but I'm pretty sure we're in the office. And we went, why don't we just use these and pull the phone out and put it on the table? And everyone went, oh yeah. And then we sort of pivoted a lot of the mainstay of the business to mobile-based workflows. We launched our multicam app in March, and we'll be launching our single cam application in October.
So you can just download it from the App Store.
The multi-camera app is on the App Store. If you have an iOS device, you'll need at least 3 iOS devices to get going. One acts as a remote, the others act as controlled devices. You can use up to 6 of those iOS devices to track up to 3 people in a 8 by 8 meter space.
Amazing. Tell us about the AI side of things.
Okay.
The AI part of the the company name. What does AI do as part of this workflow? What's it mean?
That's a good question. I think being named an AI company puts us in some interesting company market wise, but actually like the way the artificial intelligence works is we use a combination of classic computer vision and deep learning and models and neural networks. Fundamentally, we need video, frame by frame video, to understand human beings in that video, right? So we've trained our models to say that is a human or there's another human. Do we want to track 2 humans? Let's track the first 2 we see. We used key points on the body, so 34 key points in our model. They look things like the joints. So by seeing the joints in temporal space, so between frames, but also in 3D space, we can reconstruct the body relative to the positions and the rotations of the joints.
It's fascinating. Just out of interest, how did you get to that number of points? How did you derive that? Is that like working with biologists? Or I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, basically, like a lot of models, like if you look at like MediaPipe, anything research-wise that Facebook have done in the past, is there's a pretty tried and tested method of saying these are the key points on the body you want to look at. So it's like pretty standard. Like before I joined Move, I was working for a company called TrackAb, which is a subsidiary of a larger company called Karen Higo, and we were tracking sports players and using just video. And it was a similar sort of method, right? You are looking for these points. So when I came into the Move business when it just started. It was quite a nice crossover of those two things. But yeah, it's a pretty tried and tested method of doing it.
Okay.
I think what differentiates us is what you do with that output of the AI. AI in itself can produce incorrect results or noisy data. So we have a series of processing methods on top of that we've actually patented, which involve including things like a biomechanical model of how this body should work, including things like what I call the holonomic constraints of the joints, which are the degrees of freedom of rotation, basically, that a human being can do. Although I said this the other day, someone who's double jointed was in the crowd, and they definitely sort of break the system a little bit. But yeah, then we run it through a physics model as well. So the laws of gravity are applied to the output data, and that really adds in the natural movement of fluidity and micro movement. So like the way we're sat here at the minute, if we were talking like things like a little leg bob would be captured because we've got this subtle nuance of how the body should and can move.
Interesting. So we're here recording this today at Garden Studios,
Yes.
so the AI Open Days. What's been your reflections on the day so far? How do you what sort of encapsulate this moment, I guess, in terms of how we're thinking about AI in filmmaking?
I think it's so current, isn't it? So like I think wider context market wise, I was recently at SIGGRAPH, and before that Framework and at Production Summit in Los Angeles in the space of what was a very intense week. But the whole industry is looking at AI, especially with the strikes with the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA, and looking at how AI affects things. So I think for Thomas and Rich to put on the event is needed in terms of educating, both consumers and users and those affected by AI. It's very important at this point in time to reflect upon practical uses for AI. And I think that's what I've got. And I'm a big proponent of practical uses of AI, right? And we're not trying to take jobs, we're trying to make them easier and be actually ultimately be more productive. So having an event like this in the current climate at a studio who are being impacted by things like the strikes, I think is necessary and important. And also you've got a very good crowd here today, I found. So I actually turned up late, but the attendees have been obviously selected, but and known to everyone, but very knowledgeable but also very curious. So that I think is, in terms of the technologies, has been we've noticed so far like a really good open dialogue and a lot of questions. And sometimes you go to a conference and no one says anything; it's really boring. So actually, there's been a hell of a lot of questions today from all the companies that have been here and from the attendees as well. I think it's been great to see. So it's a very good event. I'd like to see more of them, to be honest.
Amazing. Niall, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you very much for having me.